Night story. In my pre-adolescence, there was a time when I started having a lot of problems with nightmares. It happened suddenly, right after we moved to an apartment my dad had rented when we went to live in Bogota. I had always been a kid without any issues, mischievous like any other, happy, but that situation began to take away my peace so much that my dad decided to take me to therapy to find a solution to these episodes that made me wake up screaming and sweating in the middle of the night, convinced I was trying to escape from the jaws of a demon chewing on my limbs. That's how it all started. For me, it was so real that sometimes I would wake up with pain in my legs. According to the psychologist, it was all due to the normal stress a boy my age experiences, and the fact that I had had a drastic change in my environment and been separated from my mom might also play a role. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself they were just issues of my mind, I knew they weren't simple nightmares. The most difficult episodes were when, trying to wake myself from the horror I was experiencing, just before I could scream, I would go stiff in bed with my eyes open, without any control over my body, what they call sleep paralysis. It's a situation I wouldn't wish on anyone. It's like being trapped in a terrifying abyss full of ruthless cruelty. My eyes remained prisoners in their sockets, refusing to close, while my mind sank into a state of confusion and desperation. The beats of my heart thundered in my ears, increasing my anxiety with each pulse. I tried to scream, I always tried to scream, but I could barely manage to emit a weak whisper trapped in my throat, unable to find its way to the outside world. It was as if a presence was pressing on my windpipe with immense force. The room became a claustrophobic prison, and in it, I saw shadows dancing ominously on the walls, taking on distorted and sinister shapes. The air grew thicker, making it hard to breathe and sending a chill down my spine. My body, completely inert, was trapped in a painful paradox. I wanted to move, but my limbs refused to obey. My lucid, conscious mind struggled between reality and the nightmare, a prisoner of unbearable agony. And I almost always felt a creepy presence beside me, an invisible entity whispering incomprehensible words in my ear, like an echo from a dark, endless tunnel that filled me with dread. I felt like I was dying. One morning something else happened. I slept with the door open. I've never liked being enclosed. That time, for the first time in a long while, I had made it through the night and was simply there in my bed, awake, doing nothing, aware that my dad was going back and forth organizing things for a trip we were taking that day. It was around 6 in the morning. You could barely notice any light. My dad passed by the door every so often carrying something. It was during one of those moments that I saw him pass, and behind him was another person dressed in black, a man in a robe following his steps very closely. In that instant, alarmed, I tried to get up, but it was useless. I had become paralyzed again. Almost a minute later, my dad returned to the living room, and the person following him stopped following him. He stopped in front of my room, then came in and carefully closed the door without making a noise. He pressed the handle and then walked until he was standing beside the bed. Standing there, he began to say things I didn't understand. It was like a prayer in an unknown language. My eyes were fixed on the ceiling, stiff, and I could barely see a part of his face. Without a doubt, it was a man. He had a hood that covered down to his forehead, and from what I could make out, his face was full of scabs as if his skin was rotting. Inside, I just prayed to God that this demonic presence wouldn't harm me, that it wouldn't contaminate my soul with its atrocities. I wanted to stay brave, but fear was consuming me. I felt a dark aura caressing my skin, as if my body was sinking into a stinking quagmire. Suddenly, I felt something fall on my forehead, a drop of some warm, heavy liquid that ran down the side of my nose and spread over my lips. That evil man had his hand stretched out over me while he continued repeating his diabolical ritual in whispers. And every 3 words, another drop fell on my forehead. My anguish was such that tears began to stream from my eyes, but I couldn't make a sound. Above me, the stalker's gaze of that presence grew stronger and stronger. Suddenly, I saw darkness cover my sight. The man had leaned in, and now his face was right in front of mine. I saw him clearly. His skin was the color of old books, and in some places pieces were falling off in black scabs. An unbearable stench emanated from him, like stagnant water. His completely black eyes dug into mine as if trying to decipher my thoughts. At one point he stood up. His dry, cracked lips exhaled for several seconds, and his scorching breath made me nauseous, made me want to faint. My body turned ice cold while my head trembled. My head was a dark labyrinth where I saw creatures of all kinds, decapitated animals, piles of worms, blood, a lot of blood. I felt myself going somewhere dark outside of this world. I don't know what would have become of me if, at that moment, my dad hadn't pushed the door open. The presence disappeared immediately and I was finally able to let out a scream. When my dad turned on the light, he was horrified to see me. A trail of blood was running down my forehead, staining my entire sweater. He thought I had hurt my head, but there was no sign of anything like that. The blood wasn't even mine, it had fallen on me. He checked the ceiling, the room, everywhere, but found nothing. I spent that day in the hospital. No one could explain what had happened to me, but the worst part was that I wasn't reacting. I only remember being spaced out as if in a trance. In my mind, I only saw that presence and felt it stalking me, following me, telling me terrible things, atrocities that could only cross a sinister mind. Every place they took me, whenever they asked me what had happened, what I remembered, I wanted to talk, but the stench of that man would return to me and my body would paralyze. It was a friend of my dad's who realized what was really happening. My dad says they were working on a project in a town near Bogota and had met at the apartment to review some blueprints. In those days, I was at my grandmother's house. The psychiatrist had recommended that my dad move me from the place to see if the change would help me, but I remained the same. If I uttered 2 intelligible words, it was a lot. I was always alone, distant, in some corner of the house, staring into nothingness. No matter how much I wanted to do something else, play with the other kids, I couldn't. It was as if something had me imprisoned in an incessant heaviness. I lived constantly in a nightmare. Every now and then, I tried to feel better, and the stench would appear again, crushing me between anxiety and fear. That day, my dad says, his friend entered the apartment and immediately made a strange face, but he didn't pay attention. They started reviewing the blueprints when suddenly his friend fell silent, looking at a little figurine my dad had on a shelf. "What is that?" he asked. He was referring to a little red clay man that a supposed neighbor in the building had given my dad almost a week after we moved in. "All that? A guy who makes them gave it to me, but I haven't seen him around since." To make a long story short, my dad's friend, insisting on the little doll, as he explained he was sensitive to spiritual presences, ended up examining it and realized it had inside its belly a little black chain with 2 small crosses tied together with a lock of hair. Clearly that wasn't normal. My dad immediately connected everything, and that's when he decided to seek help from a priest for my case. And yes, what I was suffering from wasn't normal. As far as they could find out, I was in the middle of the initiation of a sacrifice ritual. I obviously found out about all this when I was older. He always tells me the story that it was a horrible battle. That at some point after several liberation sessions, because the spirit was on him and the target was me, he says the harassment was so intense that once he even came face to face with a man who, as he describes him, was the same one I had seen. That while he was doing his prayers one morning, he started to hear someone laughing behind him. He began to battle, rebuking while still kneeling in front of his bed. At one point he lifted his face and the man was sitting in front of him, laughing. "You're going to open the door for me again?" he repeated several times. "You're going to open the door for me again." Until suddenly he didn't feel him anymore. I haven't been the same since then. I still feel dread in dark or very enclosed places. I have trouble falling asleep or feeling calm in silent places. But I no longer become paralyzed upon waking, and I haven't seen that presence of the person who wanted to harm us again. We never found out who it was. My dad has felt guilty about it his whole life. In fact, he says there hasn't been a single day when he hasn't said a prayer for me.